Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the cheap underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now here's your host, David Hinojosa.
Welcome to another edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host this week, David Hinojosa, and today I'm speaking with Chloe Benjamin on her latest novel, The Immortalists. Chloe Benjamin is the author of the novel The Anatomy of Dreams, which received the Edna Ferber Fiction Book Award and was longlisted for the 2014 Center for Fiction First Novel Prize. A San Francisco native, Chloe Benjamin is a graduate of Vassar College and of the University of Wisconsin, where she received her MFA in fiction. She lives with her husband in Madison, Wisconsin. Chloe, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
I found your novel very, very interesting. You write about a group of brothers and sisters who go to a psychic, and they want to find out when they're going to die, essentially. What inspired you to write about this?
Well, I have always struggled myself with uncertainty, and uncertainty is so core to human life. And I think the biggest uncertainty in some ways is that we just don't know how long we have in the world. Mm-hmm. So I thought it would be an interesting question to explore in the context of a family, looking at how these four children who go to see a fortune teller live with that knowledge and process it differently over their lives.
Mm-hmm. Now, you titled the book The Immortalists. What does that mean?
Well, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek nod to the fact that, you know, when you're young, we all think that we'll live forever, and some of these characters refuse to accept their own mortality in ways that are, not realistic. But it's really hard to cope with the idea that we're mortal and that we all have expiration dates, so to speak. So the title also though refers to the name of the magic act performed by one of the siblings, Klara, who mm-hmm. grows up to become a magician. So there's a little play on that too.
Okay. Now the psychic tells them when they're going to die. How much do you think that influenced their lives? What do you think was the depth of them knowing this date?
Well, I think that's what the book explores. For some of them, it's something that they try to run away from. Others claim, "Oh, it doesn't really affect me," but in many ways it does. So I think each sibling is impacted in a different way, but it certainly has an effect on all of them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, do you think if they wouldn't have known the date or they wouldn't have gone, do you think their lives would have ended up just as the same, or do you think they would have changed? I mean, getting to the character's head.
Well, I think that's another thing that's up for debate within the book, but I do think that I don't think their lives would be the same if they hadn't gone to the fortune teller. I just think that it's too impactful of an event, and I think our lives are changed by all kinds of little things that happen every day that we might not even think about. I'm one of those people who is interested in tracking how something that seems innocuous can kind of influence in a domino effect a lot of other things.
Yeah, how little things, right, can have a ripple effect on the outcome of things.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the dates that you include here. You include January 21st, 2044. You include November 24th, 2006. Is there any reason why you included these dates in particular, or these dates just came out at random for the book?
Oh, I think more random. I mean, one of them is very far in the future. That one was certainly random. Mm-hmm. The other one, it takes place over Thanksgiving, which also situates it within this particular family reunion of sorts. So that was the reason for that one.
Okay. Now, going back to that, the Thanksgiving one is when Daniel hosts his niece and her, the father of his niece and his brother-in-law. And Daniel didn't quite believe in the psychic, do you think his life would have turned out differently if he actually did believe her? Because from the very start, he doesn't really believe it's true, but it ends up being true. So, do you think his life would have been
Right.
differently?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I think his section is really maddening for a lot of readers, and I understand why, because it takes you through the day in the life of this person who did not have to do what he did, but he's compelled because of a few different factors. So yeah, I don't think that there's any. I don't think there's any way that it would have happened that way if he hadn't gone to the fortune teller. But maybe he would have died of a different cause. Who knows?
Why do you think Daniel became so obsessed towards the end? Because it seemed like for the longest time he put it off. He didn't really. It was probably in the back of his head, but he kind of put it off a lot. And it was towards the end when the FBI investigator starts kind of delving into the case that he gets a little bit more into it. Why do you think that dynamic happened, or why did you include that dynamic, that conflict of him letting it go for a long time and then really, really getting into it towards the end?
Well, I think that each of the siblings cover a certain amount of time in their sections, and his happens once he's an adult. So I knew that that would be the time when this recurred for him, like for the simple sort of practical fact that this is when his section was taking place. But also I think it was interesting to me to look at somebody who had their lives figured out in a lot of ways, and what can happen when an event from long ago comes back to haunt you. And, that happens for so many of us. Something that we've repressed or something that we haven't given much credence to recurs.
Yeah, those things tend to happen more often than not. Now, why do you think they went to see the psychic? Because, in the novel, they find out about the psychic from a neighbor. And the neighbor, I believe when I read it, I said, well, I get it. I get how the neighbor or their family went to see a psychic because they had an ill grandmother who had like a terminal illness or something, and they wanted to know and they wanted to properly say goodbye, and they got that chance. But for example, these were all adolescent kids, and why do you think they did that to themselves? Do you think it was just curiosity, or do you think there was something deeper for their action?
Well, could you tell me a bit more about what you mean by that question?
Yes. Well, I just want to. I'm trying to get into a character's head. For example, they really did. I mean, their father hadn't passed away yet, and they wanted. They just wanted to know when they were going to die. I'm asking you, what's the reason? What's the motive behind
What's the reason that
yeah.
they went? Yeah. Well, I think in part, so they go before their father dies. I think it has to do with this cultural moment of 1969 New York. That's such a fraught, explosive time in American history, and they're feeling kind of left out by it, but they're also feeling freaked out by it. So they hear about this woman. I think there's certainly this kind of morbid fascination, which I think a lot of kids have and a lot of people have. But also they're, the eldest daughter in particular, Varya, is really craving something that she can know for sure, something that she can hold on to in the midst of this really chaotic time.
I see. And correct me if I'm wrong, she's the one that actually kind of pushes them to go. Daniel, I think, finds out where the psychic is, but Varya is the one that kind of pushes the notion of going. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's Daniel and Varya together, although Klara, being somebody who, even as a child, was interested in magic, kind of jumps on board more easily. So there's a little bit of everything.
Now, you mentioned Judaism, Hinduism, and even you talk about the Romani family. How important is culture in the book?
I think it's really important. I wanted to write a book that was reflective of the diversity of our country and of our world. And so in order to do that, though, I knew it was really important to write with integrity these people of different backgrounds, some of which I share and some of which I don't. So I did a lot of research, and I really wanted to give each character the time and space to kind of express their own perspective, which is influenced by where they come from.
Now, which character do you think really took to heart what the psychic said? The one that you think this is the one that, hit him the most?
I think they all do in different ways. I mean, what do you think?
I think Simon really took it to heart, being the youngest one. I mean, I was fascinated with the book. Like, that's why I'm asking all these questions. These are all like things that I thought about when I was reading it, and I wrote down my notes. I'm like, I'm going to ask her about this. How did you come up with this? So I really enjoyed the book. Now, what do you think was the lesson that everybody learned, or all the characters learned from this experience, or from, throughout the book? What is one thing that you think they shared in the learning process?
Well, I think one thing that they shared is that they realized how important family is. For better or worse, all of these characters are shaped by their experience of family and their experience of each other. And there are estrangements and arguments, and there's a lot of love, just like there is in most families. So I think, as much as some of them try to run away from their familial history, they all come back to realizing the importance of that bond.
Yes, and I remember how Gertie, the mother, she's there, and she's, always trying to look out for them in her own way. And I feel like, she really was there for them, and again, in her way. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
About the character.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, I think she's kind of an unsung hero in certain ways.
Exactly.
She's a matriarch. She's a tough old broad, and she's been through a lot. And I love Gertie. She's actually my husband's favorite character.
Yes, absolutely. She's one of my favorite characters. I mean, she's tough as nails, and then she's just there, and and always supportive. Again, and in her own way, maybe not the way they want her to support them, but she's always there, like standing.
Yeah, that's so true.
I also want to talk about what character do you identify with the most? I'd like to get into your head a little bit more.
Yeah. I think there are pieces of me in each of them. I have more similarities than you might think with Simon's section, even though I'm not a gay man. I grew up in San Francisco. I was a ballet dancer. I have gay family members. So I feel really strongly about a lot of the issues in his section. I'm a big dreamer like Klara. I'm ambitious, but I'm also a big worrier. So I have a lot of DNA shared with Varya, as much as I wish I didn't. I think the one that's most different from me is Daniel. But I'm sure there are parts of me in him, too.
Why do you think you're more different? Daniel is the one that you don't really associate with.
He's the most conservative, and he's the most, his job is being in the military, being a military doctor. Those are two things that I could, never see myself doing, not because of any judgment, just because I would not be, you don't want me in the military, I'm going to run away at the first sign of any problem. I'll be like, no! I would definitely be the first one to die anywhere. So I think his path and his orientation toward the world is a little different.
I see. Now, what is one thing that readers can take from your book? Because, again, I found it fascinating. I had so many questions, and I just thought I just couldn't stop reading it. And what is one thing that they can take from your writing?
Oh, well, thank you so much, by the way. I really appreciate just how much you've engaged with the book. I hope that people take away a sense of solace and companionship about these issues of loss and anxiety and uncertainty. I think we all struggle with these questions to some degree or another, and some of us are better than others at not thinking about them and at living fully despite them. But I hope that it gives people an opportunity to explore their own feelings and maybe a prompt to talk about them with other people. Maybe your siblings. I hope it makes people call their siblings.
Yeah, I actually talked to my family about it. I was reading this book and I told them about it, and we had a family discussion about the themes about it, and that's why I also came up with other questions as they were asking me questions about the book and things of that nature. So it turned out to be a nice family discussion, and it got a little deep, with the whole notion of, well, what would you do if you knew, when you were going to pass away, and so and that leads me to my next questions. What would you change? One thing that you would change about your life if you actually knew the date that you were.
That's a good question. I think that there's probably a difference between the one thing that I would want to change and the one thing I would change. The thing I'd want to change is to live with less fear.
Okay.
But I know that there's a difference between, that's easier said than done. So I don't know if it would affect me that way.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I think that, looking at the siblings, like they didn't all choose to be affected by the prophecy in the way that they were. Some things just come down to your psychology, things that you can't always control. So that would be my goal, though. What about you?
One thing I would do is I would travel more. I mean, I've traveled, but I would really make it a point to travel a little bit more and see more of the world, and especially if I knew, hopefully it would be a date way into the future, not a close one, but nevertheless, I would absolutely travel more and take that all in, because I believe that's the only thing you take. So that's, I guess that's one of the things I would do. Yeah, I would travel a little bit more, see the world.
That's a good one too.
Yeah. Is there anything you would like to add, Chloe, to this interview before we sign off?
I don't think so. I think that you probably have a lot of material, and I really appreciate the conversation. There's really no greater satisfaction for me as a writer than to know that people are engaging with the book, and I could tell how much you thought about it. So I really am thankful for that.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to thank you for being with us today, and I wish you all the best with the book. It's a great, great read.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Likewise. I've been talking with Chloe Benjamin on her new novel, The Immortalists, a fascinating read that probes the line between destiny and choice, reality and illusion, this world and the next. I highly recommend it. I'm your host, David Hinojosa, and I want to remind our listeners that if you didn't hear our regularly scheduled broadcast on our NPR affiliate, you can listen to this interview on our YouTube page, Good Books Radio Strong and Cook. Thanks for listening.